All right. Okay. So welcome everyone to Torah and Tea that's continuing, which I love and I'm very excited about. And thank you. We're going to finish Chana. And then thanks to Tessa, we have another topic that we're moving on to. Okay. So back into Chana. I think everyone that's here was here last time. So I think we are good to just jump right back into where we're at with her. I believe, does anyone know, did we do all the practical applications through number 5? Or did we not do all of them? I guess let's just start, if anyone wants to let me know, but I feel like, okay, let's just start with back to practical application number 3, because 3, 4, and 5 kind of just like all go in a row, just to kind of remind ourselves what sort of headspace we were in when we were talking about Chana. So I'll just read through them. So practical application number 3. The above frustration and prayers of Chana can probably reflect similar thoughts and feelings each and every one of us has had at some time or another, if not all the time. We enter these destructive cycles. We get lost in the mundane monotony of life, year after year, doing the same stale things with no obvious change. Why doesn't it change? We beseech, pray to go beyond and be different, think different, and do different. But how? We cannot claim that these were Chana's exact words, but what we do know is that although the journey to Shiloh began in the same way as it did every year, it did not end that way. The breakthrough happened with the words brought in above at text 6. So Chana rose up. Chana was no longer succumbing to the stagnant pattern of repetitiveness. She rose up from her private awareness to an expanded one. She got up with the determination to make a difference, to bring about the much needed change. So we know from Chana that, right, because we were saying she was there, she came to the temple a lot. She was praying there a lot. What's so different about now? But it is different. What she requests, how she requests it, the energy that she's coming from is very different than until now. Okay, let's see. Instead of me doing all the reading. Practical application number 4. Do you want to read that for us, Harriet?
Okay.
There you go.
4. How can we be different? By rising up, standing up, getting up, and not allowing for anything to keep us down. And how do we raise ourselves up as follows? Chana was no longer an individual consumed with her grief, and she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. Chana's bitterness was focused on the lack of spirituality in her people, a bitterness of spirit, not a bitterness of matter. This verse describing her prayer literally translates as, and she prayed for the Lord. Now she was not asking something of God. She was praying for the sake of God's purpose and dedicating herself to its advancement. She was now praying for the permanent return of godliness into the lives of the people. She wept bitterly about the decadence that had become the norm.
Thank you. And let's see. Robin, do you want to do practical application number 5?
Sure. We raise ourselves up and create change by praying for what really matters. When we pray for the broken spirit as much as for the broken matter, when we ask why is this world seemingly so devoid of revealed purpose, and people would rather hurt each other than embrace each other, this creates change. When we really cry for all the pain and suffering in the world, a bitterness for the lack of spirit, that cry inspires us and the world to become different. And take it one step further, after the why, since we will never truly know until Moshiach comes, our main question should be, what now?
Okay. Thank you. So Chana knew that, okay, right? Chana is accustomed to the crying and the praying, right? But she knows it's not enough, right? Like that's just the beginning point, right? If all we do is cry and be sad about the state of things around us, we don't actually affect change, right? Our feelings are to spur us into action. Our feelings are not enough to be the thing that makes the difference. So here, Chana's actually moved beyond her personal feelings, right? She's taking action on a larger scale. She's rising up out of her grief, starting with prayer, right? And then we go to action. So this is the action that she took in text number 10. Text number 10 in the book of Samuel, chapter 1, verse 11, she makes a vow. And she says, and she vowed a vow and said to the Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the affliction of your bondswoman, and you will remember me, and you will not forget your bondswoman, and you will give your bondswoman a man-child, and I shall give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. Okay, so now she's not just repeating last year's prayer. Her prayer has a completely new quality, and it comes along with a vow. And what she's essentially saying is, right, God, your people have to make a change, right? The cycle has to be broken. Like this, and we spoke about this cycle much along in the times of Devorah, continuing to now. And she said, it's like time now to where we need real leadership in the form of monarchy. The people are ready for real leadership. So monarchy is really just like an earthly reflection of like God is our king. So the idea of accepting the rule of a king, it requires total submission the same way it does with God. So the people hadn't really had that experience yet, right? They were leaderless for too long, and they needed a leader that would really guide them in the ways of monarchy to help them, like to really have that quality of understanding what it's like to be really given over, to be, in Hebrew, the word is bittul, like nullified. I don't know if that's the right word, like really just like submission, like really give yourself over to something higher than yourself. Okay, so like until now they had the judges brought temporary salvation, but they weren't successful in bringing about real progress. And really that would be having a king, which was anyways a mitzvah for them to appoint a king, right, in the land of Israel. And so over here, hold on. Let me just make sure everyone who's trying to get in can get in. Okay. So over here, Chana is praying, not just for herself, but like, God, give me the child that's going to be able to bring about the change. Okay. Like, let me play a part in this mission of the next stage in the Jewish people. Okay. And so it's not really, it's away from, I want a child, right? It's away from the prayer of, I want a child of my own, to I'm praying for a leader of the people. And she actually, if you see in the Hebrew, she davened for a male. Her request was for Zera Anashim, seed of men, and she was referring to Moses and Aaron, Moshe and Aaron, brothers, right? In Tehillim, in Psalms, there's a verse that says Moshe and Aaron were among his priests, and Shmuel was among those who called upon his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. So this show, like the fact that they're put together in the same verse, it shows that Shmuel was considered equal to Moses and Aaron together. And what Chana is saying here is, I want to have a child that the leader of the Jewish people, or the person that's going to bring about this change, which Shmuel was the one who anointed the king, like what they need is to be able to incorporate both aspects of Moses and Aaron. So Moses was like a man of God, and Aaron was like a man of the people. Okay, because we know that Moshe had the highest level of prophecy. He had spoke face to face with God multiple times, and Aaron was known to bring a lot of peace amongst people. Right, he would go to like couples that were fighting, and he would make peace between them. He would say to one, the other one is, apologizes and wants to make peace, and then go to the other one and say the other one apologizes and wants to make peace. And he was known for Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom. He loved peace and he ran after peace. So again, what she's saying is for this child that I'm praying for to have the qualities of both Moshe and Aaron. Because she understood on a deeper level that is what was needed for the change that the people needed at that time. Okay. And she makes this promise, right? She makes a vow in her prayer that she's going to bring him to the sanctuary and entrust his education and his initiation to the hand of the Kohen Gadol, the high official, because she felt that the environment of the sanctuary was the proper setting for his upbringing. Now, this was at the age of 3. So at the age of 3, she was essentially, I'm going to have this child, I'm going to raise him myself till the age of 3, and at the age of 3, I'm giving him up to be like raised in the sanctuary setting. This is not our way, right? Like our way, obviously, is that Jewish education and motherly, maternal love and instinct that everything begins at home. But in this instance, for Shmuel, it was essential. Like for Chana and for Chana, it was the ultimate in self-sacrifice. Okay, so it's not like, oh, we learned from Chana that we should, you know, send away our children at a really young age or something like that. It's the opposite. It's like, imagine a mother sacrifice here. She was childless for so long, then she finally has a child, but that child was like, kind of like we said before, she was praying. It was like for the sake of God, for the sake of the Jewish people. It was the ultimate mesirat nefesh, the ultimate giving of herself to be like, I'm going to raise him till he's 3, and then I'm going to like send him off. And we do see that in history, mothers have done this. Like, it's kind of like giving up your mothering for the good of the child, right? So in Russia or in Holocaust times, when parents would like send their kids on a boat or to America or something, right, to save their life. So you're like giving up the ability to mother your child for the sake of the child. And that even happens a lot of times, even with Chabad Rebbitzin's world, you know, like recently I heard the Chabad Rebbitzin in Honolulu talk about how she sent her son at the age of 9 to New York for his Jewish education because homeschooling in Hawaii wasn't working anymore, and he thrived, and in the end, you know, and he's now an adult, and it was so great for him, but for her it was like the biggest pain. Like, how do I send a 9-year-old? You know, he was stayed by family, you know, things like that. But there are families in Russia or in, you know, different areas that will send their kid at a much younger age than normally you would do for the sake of their Jewish education. So it's that idea where is that it's not our way to begin with, but in certain scenarios, a mother will sacrifice her ability to be like that hands-on mother in that moment for the sake of the child. And that's exactly what Chana did here. Okay, so this leads us to practical application.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
During the High Holy Days, we read the story, we read the Parsha about Chana.
Yeah.
And I never heard that Chana was concerned about the state of the Jewish people. What you talked about, is that Midrash or is that actually in the Torah? I don't remember seeing that.
No, that's much more. You're going to get that from some of the commentaries, from Talks of the Rebbe, where he quotes different commentaries and sources and brings that out. I don't think you see that straight out in the verses.
Thank you.
You could deduce it from some of the ways that, like, now her prayer is all of a sudden different, and we said, but she's been doing this for however many years. You know, you could like deduce it in a certain sense, but I don't think it's straight out in the verse that that's like a clear understanding of her.
Thank you.
Adina?
Maddie, okay, do you know if a child would experience trauma from being sent away, or even from that young age, do they understand and accept it? You know, I really think that, Maddie, I think that's extremely individual. I think it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? So it's really about knowing your own child, knowing what is best for your child, and sometimes the choice that, you know, in other words, for one kid, it could be not the right thing. It could be trauma, but for another kid, it's exactly the right thing. So I don't think we could do like a one-size-fits-all when it comes to, you know, again, a mother's sacrifice and all the things you have to take into account. I mean, look, in today's world, right, most kids go away for the first time at college, right? So in the Chabad world, if you're going to stay in Jewish education, and even in Chabad schools, let's say, it depends where you live. If you live in New York or in Chicago or in LA, you have that all the way through you're finished with high school. For me, I grew up in San Diego. I went to Chabad day school all the way through 8th grade. And for high school, I wanted to go to a Chabad girls' high school. So the nearest one was in Los Angeles. So I, at the age of 14, right, lived in a dorm in Los Angeles and came home every other weekend. But for me, it was the best thing. Like, yes, did it have its challenges? 100%. But I didn't have the teenage phase where the teenager and the parents don't get along, because I just appreciated my parents tremendously, right? I looked forward to coming home. I became very independent. I learned how to live with roommates, you know, like all of that. So it's really just a perspective you're coming from. I don't think it's a one size fits all, you know? Yeah, that's the most I can say on that. I think that it's like every mother and using her intuition and her child's personality to decide. Okay.
Oh, Adina,
yes.
Can you clarify something for me, please? This is Shmuel we're talking about, and he was a Nazirite, right?
Yes.
And he was also the prophet who anointed King Saul?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. I never made that connection that it was the same person.
Yeah, same person. Okay, and we're going to talk about him being a Nazarite also. So practical application number 6. Do you want to read that for us, Barbara? Oh, you don't have it. Naomi, do you want to read that for us? Practical application number 6?
Yeah, let's see. Practical application number 6.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I see it. I see discussion point, learning exercise.
It's after.
Here it is. I see. It's on the bottom and then the top.
Yeah.
Today, we do not have the Jewish kingdoms of then. However, Chana, in order to create change, took a vow, a hardcore action with tangible results and pragmatic applications. And indeed, her actions birthed the miraculous leader, Shmuel, who would usher in the era of King David and King Solomon and the first temple in Jerusalem. So in order to create change, we too must take an action, a vow, do something, and something will happen.
Okay, thank you. So Chana also added to her vow, right? She said, she added the idea of being a Nazarite, like Naomi brought up. So, and the reason that she did this is because of the important role that Shmuel was going to have to uplift the Jewish people. So a Nazarite is not something that we have today, but a Nazarite is someone, they take on a vow on themselves and they have extra requirements. So one of them is that they do not cut their hair at all. And she says that in the verse. She says, there shall no razor come upon his head. And the Hebrew word for razor is moreh. Moreh, which stems from the same root as marut, authority. So in other words, what Chana is saying here is in order to succeed in his mission, preparing people for the monarchy, Shmuel would have ultimate authority. In other words, no one would come upon his head. So it's like an allusion to the protection of his head, okay? And the name that Chana chose for her son is also very significant. Shmuel, number one, it means God listens. Shema, like Shema Yisrael, right? It's actually like a combination of Shema Yisrael, so God listens. It also has the word Shaul, Shmuel and Shaul. Shaul means a borrowed entity. It means to borrow. Okay, so it's a borrowed entity. And in her new approach that's happening now here for the first time, Chana is saying, right, this isn't my child. It's like a borrowed entity. Like she's kind of saying like, and which actually is true for all of us, is that our children, right, we think they're ours, but they're not ours. They're like gifts from God. He's like, you know, I'm gifting this soul to you to raise, right? Or to have under your jurisdiction for as long as I let that child live, so to speak. So Chana's kind of like saying that here, like, this is not for me. That's what she was praying for. I'm praying for to be able to birth the leader that the people need. And that she was also kind of in that alluding to also the fact that it's like on borrowed time. Like I know that I get a certain amount of time with him and then I, in a sense, give him up. And really that's how it is with all of our children. So it's clear here that these events, this time, in this story that happened in Shiloh are very different. It's Chana breaking the pattern and breaking a cycle and taking a completely new approach, right? Going from a personal desire to achieving a public need, okay? And I think that that's something really powerful and really like selfless of her as a mother and as a woman, because you think like if she's so broken and she wants a child so much, like keep doing it for the personal need, like just keep praying that you should have a child. And she really switched that. Okay, and then back to like what Barbara mentioned. Yes, she was a prophetess. To answer, Naomi Berger asked, was Chana a prophetess? Yeah. So why is the story of Chana read? We read it as the Haftorah on Rosh Hashanah, on the Jewish New Year, the first day of the year, right? So our sages, they chose this chapter to be run on Rosh Hashanah because it's, I guess, tradition or passed down that that's actually when she conceived Shmuel, right? It says in the verse, on this day, God remembered. It's like Rosh Hashanah is a day of remembrance, Yom HaZikaron, and it says on this day, God remembered Chana and blessed her with conception. So there's a very powerful connection between Chana and her story and Rosh Hashanah, right? Even on Rosh Hashanah, what do we wish each other? Shana Tova, Happy New Year, right? Which if you, it feels this, it's that it's that it's like a redundant phrase and an oxymoron, right? Like new is something fresh, like a new thing, but a year is cyclical and repetitive, right? And here when we say, and actually even in Hebrew, the word for year is Chana, and Chana also means repetition, okay? So what's really interesting here is like that combination of both is that this idea that, if we keep doing the same thing, right? What's it like? The definition of insanity is like doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Results, yes.
Right? So it's like here, Chana did something new and she did something different and she got a different result. And that's Rosh Hashanah also, right? A lot of times we take on resolutions and we take on different things on Rosh Hashanah, right? But we also have to ask ourselves, like the idea of taking on something new, right? Like, is it, and it could be the same thing, but it's new, but it's different because this time we're going to ask for it differently, or this time we're going to show up to our year differently, or we're going to show up to our relationship with God differently. So it's kind of like holding these two opposites in our hand where it's like, yes, Rosh Hashanah is repetitive and the new year is repetitive and the year is cyclical and we're going to come to this every year. And on the other hand, what new thing are we creating here? Okay. Okay, so now we get to practical applications. It says learning exercise. I put learning exercise. Okay. To apply what we've learned here, what are some of the things, the lessons that we could take away from Chana? So number one, take a spiritual journey and invite friends to join you, right? That idea that they didn't just, when Elkanah and Penina and Chana and their whole household, right? They didn't just go and say, we're going to just take care of ourselves. They took the long route to inspire people along the way and bring other people along with them on their journey. Be provoked, incited, and enticed to make the world and yourself better. Learn to pray not only for yourself, but for the world, not only for matter, but for spirit. Raise yourself up by asking, how can I make a difference? And make that difference with action, right? It's not enough just to be moved in our thoughts or moved in our feelings. We want that to lead to our action. Take upon yourself one good deed, big or small, that you vow to follow all the way through. And this is really the challenge for all of us, right? That we don't go through the same old, the same grind, the same day-to-day, right? And it's just like doing the same thing over again, but really creating a new cycle, which is exactly what Chana did. This change in Chana really, it was like pivotal. It brought about the child that was also then the one who, right? Like it changed the entire pattern of what was going on for the Jewish people and their cyclical pattern and was really the beginning of their stage into monarchy and a whole new era for the Jewish people. And so I think Chana was able to achieve that because of seeing herself as an active partner in achieving God's goals. And that's really where that led to. Okay, so now we have our closing right on there. Do you want to read that for us, Rita? Did I call on you already? I feel like I already asked you to read.
Okay.
Okay.
We take a cue from Chana's example of breaking a pattern and making a change. Instead of focusing primarily on herself, she sought to play a part in the larger picture of ushering in the monarchy. After Chana's request was fulfilled and she brought Shmuel, at the age of 3 after he was weaned, to the sanctuary, she recited a second prayer, a jubilant outpouring of thanksgiving to God. The second prayer concludes, may he raise high the standard of his anointed, literally of his Mashiach, with this prayer. She indicated what she was seeking in asking for a son who would establish the kingship. She was not asking for a national leader in a simple sense. She was asking for a son who would lay the foundation for the ultimate king, Moshiach. This prayer is also included in the Rosh Hashanah Haftorah. Moshiach's role is to unite all the people under the rule of the King of Kings, God. And every single one of us can and shall make this type of spiritual journey to inspire a world of unity, both individually and collectively.
Thank you. All right, any questions before we move on to a completely new topic? Everyone's good? All right. We are going to move on to a very new topic. I'm going to share my screen. So if you did not print all of those handouts, not to worry. They turned into mini textbooks. So don't worry about that. Okay, let me do Let me share this over here. Does everyone see that? Let's see. Okay. So one of the first ones that I sent was this timeline of Jewish history. And it's, as you see, 30 pages long. So this is just very comprehensive, and really it's for your own knowledge, okay? It's kind of like a reference. So you could use it just for your own knowledge. You can use it to look and see if there's something that you just never knew, or it piques your interest or something like that. And you're like, and then you can reach out to me and say, hey, let's do a class on this part or something like that, right? And as I said before, I'm not coming here as an expert in our history, because it was just keeping track of all the timeline and dates was never my strong point. But I want to thank Tessa for coming up with this topic and encouraging me to like delve back into it and like research and remind myself and all of that. So, okay, so just in this timeline that I'm going to just go through very briefly, it starts off with kind of just like a quick overview, right? We're going to start with beginning of creation of heaven and earth, Adam and Eve, and we go to the forefathers and Egypt and traveling through the desert, the judges and the early prophets, the kings and the first holy temple, the exile in Babylon, the second holy temple, the era of the Greeks, and right, the whole Hanukkah story, the kingdom of Judea, the dynasty of the Hashmonaim, the Roman dynasty, and then we have the Talmudic era, the Mishnah, the Talmudic era of the Gemara, then the Rabbanan, the Gaonim, the Rishonim, and during that time was the Crusades, and the later Rishonim. We had a lot more persecutions and expulsions. We have a lot of that in our history. The great scholars of the Shulchan Aruch and Torah consolidation, the early Achronim and East European massacres, Achronim and early Hasidim, the later Achronim in the changing society, the Holocaust, the modern state of Israel. So that would be just like a really brief overview. Then it goes here into very comprehensive, like people, events, dates, all of that. And I'm just gonna skip through that. But that again is either for your own knowledge, or if there's something in there that you're like, wow, I really want to learn this. Okay, I'm gonna go all the way here to, if we were gonna do just from, no, I don't think I have it yet, hold on. Oh, okay, hold on. One is gonna be right here. If we go, a timeline of the transmission of Torah, okay? So there we have from the year 2448 in the Jewish year, which is in the secular year 1313 BCE, that's when we have the giving of the Torah, right? So if you just want from like the giving of the Torah till now, we have, and then you can see it says personalities and notes, and it goes through Moses to Joshua, right? And then you see there's the prophets and the judges. So now you know over here we have Devorah and Eli, right? Some names that you're probably familiar with now. Samuel up there, right? So Saul, David, Solomon, King Solomon, the Babylonians, Ezra, Nehemiah, Shimon Hatzad, and it kind of just goes through the transmission and the leadership a little bit, all the way down, as you can see, the Sephardi, the Ashkenazi, and and all the way down to the present, which is you and I learning Torah right here. Okay, and then the last one here that I just want to bring to your attention, the 6 major periods of Jewish history. If you want to just divide it a little bit, maybe more simply, right? There would be like the biblical period, and you have the years there, and we're talking about Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses, David, Mordechai, right? Then we get to the Tanaim, Hillel, Shammai, Rabbi Akiva. Obviously, there's a lot more, but these are just some of the prominent ones, and these names might be familiar. The Amurayim, Rav, Shmuel, Abaya, Rava, the Gaonim, Rab Sadia Gaon, Rav Chai Gaon, the Rishonim, down to the Achronim. Okay, so that was like the first thing that I just wanted to show you. It's a 30-page with a bunch of different timelines together, but you have that, again, just for your own knowledge. Okay, now I want to take, yes.
Hi, it's Anne in Washington. I just really appreciate the side-by-side comparison of Hebrew dates and our dates.
Yeah.
That, I mean, first of all, your timeline or table of contents itself is an amazing piece of work and tells a lot. But having the dates side by side like that is really, really eye-opening. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. My pleasure. Okay, so now the Rambam, who I don't know how many people are familiar with the Rambam or not. The Rambam is Maimonides. The Rambam wrote the Mishnah Torah, codified the Torah. I had a volume here. Now I can't find it. You know, we have like the whole set of the Rambam on the shelf. Rabbi Landa learns 3 chapters a day of the Rambam, and it's really like goes through every mitzvah in the Torah and lots of details about it. So now, in his introduction in his own introduction, the Rambam, Maimonides, it's right over here, you'll see on the screen, the Rambam's introduction to the Mishnah Torah, okay? To him going over the Torah, he actually gives a timeline and a little review over there. And so again, we're not gonna go through the whole introduction to it, because a lot of it is, again, just like this person to this person, you know, a lot of names, and you'll see that. But there are some things that I thought would be really powerful to just bring out that the Rambam writes in his introduction. So Andrea, do you want to read some for us? All right, awesome. And you see it up on the screen, right?
Yeah, you got to scroll down a little bit.
Yeah, I'll keep scrolling as you read also.
In the name of God, Lord of the world. Do you want me to read what's in the parentheses as well?
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's where it's quoted.
Then I will not be ashamed when I gaze at all your mitzvot. The mitzvot given to Moses at Mount Sinai were all given together with their explanations as implied by Exodus 24:12. And I will give you the tablets of stone, the Torah, and the mitzvah. The Torah refers to the written law, the mitzvah to its explanation. God commanded us to fulfill the Torah according to the instructions of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is called the oral law. Moses,
okay, so just right there, right? Because when I talk about the written law and the oral law, so in this verse where it says, and I will give you the tablets of stone, the Torah and the mitzvah, right? The Rambam says the Torah refers to the written law, you know, like if you open up a Torah scroll, and the mitzvah is the explanation of how to do the written law, which would be the oral law. So that's, anyways, okay, continue.
Moses, our teacher, personally transcribed the entire Torah before he died. He gave a Torah scroll to each tribe and placed another scroll in the ark as a testimonial. As Deuteronomy states, take this Torah scroll and place it beside the ark, and it will be there as a testimonial. The mitzvah, i.e. the explanation of the Torah, he did not transcribe. Instead, he commanded it verbally to the elders, to Joshua, and to the totality of Israel. As Deuteronomy states, be careful to observe everything that I prescribe to you. For this reason, it is called the oral law. Even though the oral law was not transcribed, Moses, our teacher, taught it in its entirety in his court to the 70 elders. Eleazar, Pinchas, and Joshua received the tradition from Moses. In particular, Moses transmitted the oral law to Joshua, who was his primary disciple, and instructed him regarding it. Similarly, throughout his life, Joshua taught the oral law. Many elders received the tradition from him.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there, Andrea, because now, okay, so that's kind of like the beginning of, right, just kind of describing how there was the giving of the Torah, there was the written law and the oral law, and how we see this in the verses, and how the written law was literally written, and the oral law was meant to be passed down orally, right? And then it's going to just continue here, and I'm not, you can go through that yourself if you want, but because, as you see, it just literally goes through names, this person to this person to this person, right? And who, you know, it literally, like, I think that Jews are incredible historians, and we have so much written and so much documented, right? And here it's like literally who was the next in charge and who received the tradition and who did they receive it from, and it goes with many, many, many stages over here. Okay, and I'm going to keep going down because it's more of this, and we even have this, we have this in Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. You might recognize some of these names, Hillel and Shammai and Yochanan ben Zakkai, and all of these people are in Jewish history, and there's a lot, and in the Talmud, and incredible stories about all of them, and all of this. And as you see, it's just, again, continuing down. So we're not going to read all the names of all the people, but what I do want to get us to is down here to, okay, Over here where it says Rabbi Yehuda, who was the son of Reb Shimon and referred to as Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our saintly teacher, received the tradition from his father, from Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, and from Rabbi Shimon and his colleagues. Okay, so Rabbeinu HaKadosh, or you might know him as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he composed the Mishnah. From the days of Moses, our teacher, until Rabbeinu HaKadosh, no one had composed a text for the purpose of teaching the oral law in public. The oral law was always passed down orally. Instead, in each generation, the head of the court or the prophet of that generation would take notes of the teachings which he received from his masters for himself and teach them verbally in public. Similarly, according to his own potential, each individual would write notes for himself of what he heard regarding the explanation of the Torah, its laws, and the new concepts that were deduced in each generation concerning laws that were not communicated by the oral tradition, but rather deduced using one of the 13 principles of biblical exegesis. I don't know if I said that right, and accepted by the high court. In other words, there's also 13 ways that there's ways to deduce things from Torah, like 13 rules. Like I can give you one of them. Like, for example, if there's a word, we say them they're actually in our prayers every day. Like if there's like one word in one place and one word in another place, then there's like the same word, there's something similar. We learn something about here and here, or like just juxtaposition. Like what do we learn from the fact that the red heifer and the whole section of the red heifer and Miriam, Moses' sister, passing away are right next to each other. Like there's just, when two things are next to each other, we can learn something from that. So it's like there's 13 rules that we can deduce something from Torah. So that's what that's referring to. Okay, so the situation continued, this idea of oral law and the way it was passed down, until the age of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He collected all the teachings, all the laws, all the explanations and commentaries that were heard from Moses, our teacher. So this is all from Mount Sinai. This is not made up or, people on their own inventing things along the way, and which were taught by the courts in each generation concerning the entire Torah. From all these, he composed the text of the Mishnah. He taught it to the sages in public and revealed it to the Jewish people, who all wrote it down. They spread it in all places so that the oral law would not be forgotten by the Jewish people. Why did Rabbeinu HaKadosh make such an innovation instead of perpetuating the status quo, right? The oral law was never meant to be written down and was meant to remain oral. So what happened? Because he saw the students becoming fewer, new difficulties constantly arising, the Roman Empire spreading itself throughout the world and becoming more powerful, and the Jewish people wandering and becoming dispersed to the far ends of the world. Therefore, he composed a single text that would be available to everyone so that it could be studied quickly and would not be forgotten. Throughout his entire life, he and his court taught the Mishnah to the masses. These are the great sages who are part of the court of Rabbeinu HaKadosh and received the tradition from him. And I'm going to just skip the names, but you can see them there. And it goes a little bit, I'm going to skip a little bit more. It talks a little bit about these different people. And then it goes back, and it does it the opposite way. It goes from the bottom up, who received from who, right? Even though we had that at the beginning from the top down. Okay, right? See, all the way back to Moses. So it's like we really have very clear documentation. Okay, so then all the sages who are mentioned were the leaders of the generations. Among them were heads of academies, heads of the exile, members of the great Sanhedrin. Together with them in each generation, there were thousands and myriads that heard their teachings. Ravina and Rav Ashi were the final generation of the sages of the Talmud. Okay, then we go into the Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, that expounded on the Mishnah. And the intent of both the Talmuds is to elucidate the words of the Mishnah, to explain its deeper points, and to relate the new matters that were developed by each court from the era of Rabbeinu HaKadosh until the composition of the Talmud.
Adina, it's Tessa. First of all, thank you so much for doing this, but a question.
Yes.
Were the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud written at the same time?
No, well, I believe not. No, and you could actually see that if we go back up to, even in a timeline of the transmission of the Torah, I think it's even in here, when you could, Romans, did it say, okay. Okay, so over here, interpretation and elucidation of the Mishnah. Oh, Okay, it doesn't do the exact, you're right, like in Babylonia, there was Rav and Shmuel and Rabba and Rabbi Yosef and Rav and Abaya.
And they were writing.
Right, and then in Israel was Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Kahana, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Ashi, Rabbi Ze'erab. That's the Amoraic period. And it says the years, but I do believe that one came out before the other.
Okay.
Okay.
Dina?
Yeah.
Dina, I was taught that they both were fairly simultaneous, but
Okay.
the Jerusalem Talmud, what's it called, finished earlier than the Babylonian Talmud.
Okay.
There was communication between them,
Yeah.
but then what did they closed the Jerusalem Talmud earlier.
Okay.
And Adina,
Kind of overlap.
Yeah, you could see that right here, right? In redaction of Jerusalem Talmud in 380, and then 500 was the redaction of the Babylonian Talmud, the closing of the
Yes.
Amoraic period, and that's where it ended. Yeah.
does
thank you.
one Talmud have more credence than the other? Do
Yeah.
we study more from the Babylonian one?
Yeah, and I don't think I could tell you why, but I could find out why. But then, yeah, and then here we see also the final editing of the Babylonian Talmud. Yeah, the Babylonian Talmud is like the widely studied and learned and followed and all of that. I don't know
Thank
enough.
you.
Yeah, and I could definitely look more into that. Okay, so let me get back to the introduction. Okay, so from the entire body of knowledge stemming from the two Talmuds, the Tosefta, the Sifra, the Sifri, which are, I skipped over those parts, but when it was talking about some of the different rabbis and what they wrote, can be derived the forbidden and the permitted, the impure and the pure, the liable and those who are free of liability, the invalid and the valid, as was received in tradition, one person from another, in a chain extending back to Moses at Mount Sinai. Okay, so, okay, this is also interesting. Also, the sources mentioned above relate those matters which were decreed by the sages and the prophets in each generation in order to build a fence around the Torah, okay? So we were explicitly taught about this practice by Moses, implied in the verse, and this is in Leviticus 18:30, says, you shall observe my precepts, and it means, it can be interpreted to mean make safeguards for my precepts, okay? In other words, like the idea here, make a fence around the Torah, is like if you have a roof that people can go up on, right? You have a responsibility to make a fence around it, because if someone's going to go up there, you want to make it safe, and they could fall off, and that's on you. So it's the same idea with things in the Torah, is like if this is a mitzvah to do this or to not do this, right? Then we put certain safeguards in place so that you don't end up doing something, right? So I think like the idea of muktzah on Shabbos is the same thing. It's like if I don't write on Shabbos, so muktzah is I won't even touch a pen. I won't even touch a pen because you might come to write, right? So, so that was like at one point, right? That was like one of these, what do they call it? Decrees, right? Building a fence around the Torah, like an extra precept that was added to make it possible to really keep all the mitzvot in the Torah. So that would be like an example. Similarly, it includes the customs and ordinances that were ordained or practiced in each generation according to the judgment of the governing court of that generation. It is forbidden to deviate from these decisions, as implied by Deuteronomy 17:11. Do not deviate from the instructions that they will give you, left or right. Okay. It also includes marvelous judgments and laws which were not received from Moses, but rather were derived by the courts of the later generations based on, I told you, those 13 principles. The elders of those generations made these decisions and concluded that this was the law. Rav Ashi included in the Talmud this entire body of knowledge stemming from the era of Moses, our teacher, until his own era. Okay, and then I'm just like, I want to like pick out the parts, but there's more, right? Like the sages composed this, and then, right, Rabbi Akiva, we have the Mechilta, we have the Midrashim. All of these works were composed before the Babylonian Talmud, right? When we talk about, okay, then again about passing down these, transmitting the oral law, passing down the decrees, the practices, the customs. Okay. After the court of Rav Ashi, after the court of Rav Ashi composed the Talmud and completed it in the time of his son, the Jewish people became further dispersed throughout all the lands, reaching the distant extremes and the far-removed islands. Strife sprung up throughout the world, and the paths of travel became endangered by troops. Torah study decreased, and the Jews ceased entering their yeshivot in the thousands and myriads, as was customary previously. Okay, so again, there were individuals and there were remnants of people that were still learning, but it was definitely not nearly as centralized. And that the communication, people were spread out, communication was harder. This is like the Rambam, I think, he's setting up to why he took on this task of writing the Mishnah Torah and going through all 613 commandments and going extensively into each of them. Okay, so he was showing how the courts existed at one point, and then how the courts even had to kind of, disintegrate. Okay, so again, you could definitely read more of this on your own. Right, he goes through the times of the Rishonim, the Geonim, all these different times in history. But I just want to take us to and again here, further in history, talks about the different additional difficulties, financial pressure, sages being lost, right? Like, so again, a lot more where you're like, how can we ensure that all of this authenticity is kept together and passed down? So then here, right, the Rambam says, needless to say, there's confusion with regard to the Talmud itself, both the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmud, the Sifri, the Tosefta, right? You have to have a lot of knowledge and understanding. In other words, right, if you learn Talmud, you might be familiar with, there's so much back and forth. Like every time that I'm learning with Menachem, I'm just like, I just want the bottom line. Like but like everyone has a different kind of brain, and I'm like the bottom line kind of brain. And obviously a Talmud brain, you enjoy just all these like theoretical discussions and all the back and forth. So like that was known then, the bottom line. But here, what the Rambam is saying is like that even is starting, like seeing a need where that bottom line was even getting becoming lost, so to speak. So therefore, here's where I wanted to get to. Therefore, I girded my loins, I, Moses, the son of Maimon of Spain. I relied upon the rock, blessed be he. Like, in other words, I'm relying on God. I contemplated all these texts and sought to compose a work which would include the conclusions derived from all of these texts regarding the forbidden and the permitted, the impure and the pure, and the remainder of the Torah's laws, all in clear and concise terms, so that the entire oral law could be organized in each person's mouth without questions or objections. Instead of arguments, trust me, we still have arguments, this one claiming such and another such, this is the Rambam saying his intention for compiling, it was like his magnum opus, like tons of volumes, it was his life's work. This text will allow for clear and correct statements based on the judgments that result from all the texts and explanations mentioned above from the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh until the present. This will make it possible for all the laws to be revealed to both those of lesser stature and those of greater stature regarding every single mitzvah, and also all the practices that were ordained by the sages and the prophets. So to summarize, the intent of this text is that a person will not need another text at all with regard to any Jewish law. Now, that is not the case. Of course, we need more texts. We have the Shulchan Aruch, and then we have very proficient, skilled, knowledgeable rabbanim, higher than a rabbi, who can take all the texts and all the understanding of all the intricacies and give very case-specific scenarios, or even just what is the law here, but also case-specific scenarios to an individual that has a question. But anyways, but the Rambam does say here, his idea was that there would just be one text. This text will be a compilation of the entire oral law, including also the ordinances, customs, and decrees that were enacted from the time of Moses, our teacher, until the completion of the Talmud, as were explained by the Geonim in the text they composed after the Talmud. Therefore, I have called this text Mishnah Torah, the second to the Torah, with the intent that a person should first study the written law, then study this text, and comprehend the entire oral law from it without having to study any other text between the two, right? Because as you see from this whole timeline, it's like, well, if you're going to want to know, like you study the written, and then you can go into the Mishnah, and then you could go into the Talmud, and then you can go into the Mechilta and the Sifri and the Midrash, right? And then you get kind of lost. So in other words, what the Rambam is saying is, if it says in the Torah, you should put a sign between your eyes, and you want to know the bottom line, who should put a sign, where should the sign go, what does it mean to put a sign, you can look into the Rambam, or you could go into lots of other places to know it's referring to tefillin. Tefillin is for Jewish boys over the age of 13. It's not actually between your eyes, it's on your forehead. It's black boxes made of leather with the Shema inside, like all the details of how you do a mitzvah, right? Hold on, let me just check the chat because I think something came up. Okay, these are some private notes. I'll look at them in a second. Gail, you're sending those to me privately. I don't know if that's on purpose, but I will look at those in a minute. I saw fit to divide this text into separate halachot pertaining to each particular subject, and within the context of a single subject, to divide those halachot into chapters. Each and every chapter is divided into smaller halachot so they can be ordered in one's memory. Regarding the halachot which pertain to specific subjects, some of the halachot contain the laws governing only one mitzvah. Okay, I'm not going to actually go into all that, but this is not the very end. In other words, the number that we wanted, which are incumbent on us at all times, is 613. There are 248 positive commandments, which is an allusion to the number of limbs in the human body. We have 248. Is anyone scientific here? Let me know if that matches up with what science says. 365 are negative commandments, an allusion to the number of days in a solar year. And yeah, and then all the footnotes. So that is the introduction, very long introduction that the Rambam writes in before starting the Mishnah Torah, which is said is like his magnum opus. And I don't know if any of you know, so the 613 mitzvot. So then there's one book called Sefer HaMitzvot, which just is almost like the Rambam in short. It's Sefer Mitzvot of the Rambam. So it says every mitzvah, the source of it, and a little bit about it. Versus all of his volumes that go, like I said, Rabbi Landa studies 3 chapters a day that goes through much more in depth. Now, amazingly, they even put these 613 mitzvot into 5 kids volumes, comprehensive kids volumes. And I don't know if any of you know, like Hadassah was studying for the International Chidon, it's called. And so she studied like book 1 of book 5, which is like mitzvahs 1 to 88. And she had to know them all by heart and who it applies to and when and details about it. And and then they earned a trip in New York, and there was, the game show, she didn't get it because of Corona, and the game show was canceled. It was done on Zoom, but she did get her plaque in the mail, and it's like they made this incredible, like I don't have this knowledge. Honestly, she knows more than I do at this point, but like 5 gorgeous books, really beautifully well done, put together to kind of like put all 613 commandments together, and the kids study them in amazing depth that I don't even know. But anyways, so that would kind of be like the Rambam, and not the Rambam, the Torah, but like using all of this knowledge and put into there. Okay, before I go on to the next thought, any other questions?
Yes.
Yes, go for it.
What would be an example of a positive commandment versus a negative commandment?
Okay, great question. So, well, first of all, like the way it's worded, right? So in the 10 Commandments, for example, we have honor your father and mother. That means that's what you should do, right? And then don't kill is an example of what you shouldn't do. Now, sometimes there is the same mitzvah put in positively and put in negatively. In other words, when it talks about the mitzvah of Shabbos, in one place it says shamor es yom haShabbos lekacho, you should guard Shabbos and keep it holy. And another place it says zachar es yom haShabbos lekacho, you should remember Shabbos and keep it holy. So the 2 different phrases are actually 2 different commandments. One is all the positive mitzvot that we do on Shabbat, right? The candle lighting and the kiddush and the challah and all that. And then the other one is all the things we don't do on Shabbat. So sometimes it's the same mitzvah that has a positive and negative component. Okay, let me just look back at these questions. Okay, so Gail said, so the oral Torah was written down going all the way back to Moses. So how come so many of the precepts are not certain? Different opinions written down. Was it because the remission was occasionally an error? Definitely not because the remission is an error. I'm not sure what you mean by, you mean like, why isn't it, instead of it being like argumentative, like, well, this and well, this and well, this, like, why isn't it just, here's what you do, okay? So now if I think that might be your question. I think the other really beautiful thing about Torah, and actually this is what we're gonna get to. So, I'm gonna save it because in the 4th tab up over here, and that's where, when I said I had shiny object syndrome and I was going into all the different directions, we're gonna talk about the divine element of Torah and the human element of Torah and all of that. So hopefully that will answer those questions when we get up to it, but I think that that's fascinating. Fascinating, even to see like how God intended for the Torah to be in this world. Okay, so the fence around the Torah is open to interpretation. No, I do not think it's open to interpretation. I think that these are the fences that were put around the Torah were enacted by courts of law, right? So we had court, like when it says Rav Ashi and his court, it wasn't one individual, it was, right, like the courts, the Jewish governing court at the time, and how they deduced and came to that thing. I mean, it's probably a little bit like that's just in a very basic way, but you can go back and see like where things come from and why and point of time, anything. Okay. Okay, I think that answers your questions. Okay, so now I'm going to take it to, before we go into like, yeah, one more thing I thought to talk about, and these are, besides for codifying Jewish law, the Rambam also has put down 13 principles of Jewish faith, recorded them. Sorry, he recorded them. I wouldn't say he made them up. He just recorded them. And I think that maybe many of you are familiar with it, maybe not. I just figured we'll just read through them briefly so that we kind of like understand the premise of how we are approaching this entire topic when we talk about it. So let's see. Anne, do you want to read that for us?
Sure. The great codifier of Torah law and Jewish philosophy.
Uh-oh. Did I just lose you? Oh, you're muted.
Part of the script is behind pictures, and I've totally lost my cursor, so someone else is going to have to read.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem. Let's see, Tessa, do you want to read for us?
The great codifier of Jewish philosophy, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, also known as the Rambam, compiled what he refers to as the Shlosha Asar Ikarim, 13 fundamental principles of the Jewish faith as derived from the Torah. Maimonides refers to these 13 principles of faith as the fundamental truths of our religion and its very foundations. The 13 principles of faith, as recorded in Maimonides' introduction to Perek Chelek, are as follows. Belief in the existence of the Creator, who is perfect in every manner. Your picture is in the way, and is the primary cause of all that exists. The belief in God's absolute and unparalleled unity. 3, the belief in God's non-corporeal
hard word.
Corporeality, pardon me, nor that he will be affected by any physical occurrence such as movement or rest or dwelling. The belief in God's eternity, the imperative to worship God exclusively and no foreign false gods. The belief that God communicates with man through prophecy.
Number 7.
Number 7, the belief in the primary of the prophecy of Moses, our teacher. The primacy. 8, the belief in the divine origin of the Torah. 9, the belief in the immutability of the Torah. 10, the belief of God's omniscience and providence. 11, the belief in God's reward and retribution. The belief in the arrival of the Messiah and in the Messianic era. 13, the belief in the resurrection of the dead.
Okay. Yeah, and then it just says that some people have a custom to say those in their morning prayers, right? So like Ani Mamin, right? If you're familiar, Ani Mamin ba'amuna shalima, right? Like if you're familiar, that's a famous song.
Adina, I have also read that many Jews sang this marching into the gas chambers.
100%. Yeah, very famous. Some really chilling, moving stories about that I'll save for another time. Yeah. Okay, so with that, we can. that's the whole background. That's the setup. Does anyone have any questions on any of that so far?
Again, Adina, toda rabah. When I asked for this, I didn't mean for you to write your PhD.
You ain't seen nothing yet, Tessa. This is like, I'm like, how am I going to fit all this into 3 classes?
No, I think we'll maybe have to do more than 3,
We-
but
we
it's so
just might.
perfect. Just to see it in front of me,
Yeah,
it really does help clarify it. Thank you so very
my pleasure.
much.
Is this what you had in mind when you said that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But
Other
I
than
mean,
the
but it
PhD
went
part.
into much, actually, I asked for a cookie and you gave me a cake. So what can I tell you? Beautiful.
It's good that way.
Beautiful.
I'll always
Yeah,
take
yeah.
cake. Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. So now I thought, like, that really, I mean, we could obviously go into history much more. And again, if any of you see on the timeline something that you want to go into, but I personally like to always combine, factual stuff with also just like some more maybe like meaning, or how do I incorporate this into my life or whatever, right? I don't want to just give you like a timeline or some history that you could probably also just find somewhere or whatever. So this is where I think it's like interesting to see some, and this has like sources and texts, like back to kind of the way that I've set up some of our other classes about the divine and the human in Torah. And there's lots to say on that, but I thought we'll just start here. So part 1 of this, the divinity of Torah, okay? And is it helpful for everyone if I keep sharing my screen to do this? Is that good? Okay. So the divinity of Torah. What is Torah? And in his formula, this is why I brought in the 13 principles of Jewish faith. In his formulation of the 13 principles of Jewish faith, Maimonides writes, the 8th principle is the divinity of the Torah. That is, we believe that this entire Torah, which we now have, is the one given by Moses, our teacher, and is entirely from the mouth of the Almighty. There is no difference between the verses, the children of Ham, Cush, and Mitzrayim, and Phut, and Canaan, right? Like when it goes through just like lineage, or the name of his wife was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, or Timnah was a concubine. And the verses, I am God, your God, or hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one. For it is all from the mouth of the Almighty, all God's Torah, whole, pure, and holy. Maimonides also emphasizes that not only the written Torah, the 5 books, right? Again, if you open up a Torah scroll, that's what we refer to when we say the 5 books, but also the oral Torah, the entire body of interpretation and exposition, which accompanies it. All right, so text 1, and this is from the Jerusalem Talmud. So there we go. Not just the Talmud Bavli, not just the Babylonian one, but sometimes also.
Dina, I want to if I may interrupt for just
Please,
a moment.
Always, yeah.
So I understand that in the Orthodox movement, that it is without doubt that Hashem gave Torah word for word and all that. That I actually want to believe that myself. That's the way I lean. However, I know that in the conservative movement, and I don't know about the reform, but in the conservative movement, and maybe Ria or Barbara can help me out on this, that many people say, or the movement in the general says, that Torah is God-inspired, but written by man. I don't quite know how to interpret that. And for me, even though I am a conservative Jew, I still like the concept that Torah is from God from Mount Sinai. So I'm just putting that into the mix, that not everybody feels that way.
Right. So go ahead.
Whether it be right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and that could be its own class, but again, I'm obviously teaching this from the perspective that this is entirely godly. I believe that 100%. I don't think that I don't even know how to finish my sentence. Like, I don't think I could teach it any other way. I don't think I could get behind it.
Right.
If I felt like.
And that's fine, because I appreciate that interpretation. That's why we're studying with you, and not with the conservative rabbi about this.
And you know what? It could be its own fascinating class. I'll tell you why. I actually I think I shared all this with you. So my father, both of my parents became observant later in their lives. I mean, before they got married to each other, before they had me, I grew up observant. But my father, for him, it was a very intellectual journey. I'm sure you've heard me say this plenty of times, right? So my father was like on a mission, so to speak, to be like, either this is a bunch of baloney made up by a bunch of rabbis, or it's godly, right? If it's godly, there's something to look into and something, to find out. if it's made up by a bunch of rabbis, there's no way I'm going to like change my life and do this. And so for my father was a very, very, very intellectual journey. And he went to yeshiva and studied and questioned and asked and like, you know, like really, really, truly, until he really came to the depth of understanding that this is godly. And it's not. So what's fascinating is I grew up around a Shabbat table where we would have guests from all walks of life come to our Shabbat table at home and tell my father that Judaism was made up by a bunch of rabbis or whatever. And my father would just whip out answers and books and have ways to show like how that cannot be, in a way probably to a depth that I don't even fully understand, but like that could even be its own class, right? Like how could we believe that this is fully godly? But there is like, I mean, I'll just throw one off the cuff, right? If this is like a very famous one, but in the Torah, right, it says to only eat animals that chew their cud and have split hooves. And then it lists 4 animals that only do one or the other. They either chew their cud or they have split hooves. Okay. Now, a bunch of the world hadn't been discovered yet. This is like pre-discovering America, right? If men were going, or humans were going to sit down and write such a book, how could they make such a preposterous claim and that it's still proven true today? That we have not discovered any other animal, any other species that only has one of these signs and not the other, right? So if I was going to be the person that sat down to make up a religion or make up some form of book that humans are going to follow, you would just watch your back a little bit, right? You wouldn't make any kind of preposterous claims that prove you completely untrue. So like, but that is in the Torah, and it's never, and our Torah, right? If we're talking about, this is in there since written down. I mean, Torah is, again, from my perspective, God's wisdom and will, and it predates the world. But as a written form given to us as humans, right, in the year 2448, in the Hebrew year, 1948 in the English year, then 1948, right? Okay, sorry, where was I going with this? Right, then, I don't remember. I just lost the end of my sentence. Then, help me out. In other words, you would have to just be really careful if you're going to make an assumption like if a human was going to sit down and write something like that versus God could say that and it's not ever been proven untrue. So that's just like one of the really basic known ways of being like, clearly this is not can't be done by a human because a human couldn't have even known that. Most of the world wasn't even discovered yet or whatever, you know.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, Adina?
Yes.
Back to the text, the oral Torah is divine, and I'm wondering, the oral Torah is, I understand there's a lot of debate. One person says it's one way and another person says another way. So does this mean that God put these words in all these different people's mouths and the conflicting opinions?
Yeah, so I think hopefully in this actual class, we'll see how much of this one we'll get through today. I want to explain how God set it up, where it's divine, and God also gave it over to people and how that is meant to be used and whatever. So hopefully that will answer it. But look, if you see in text 1, it says Scripture, Mishnah, Talmud, and Agada. Even what a proficient pupil is destined to innovate was already said to Moses at Sinai.
Wow.
In other words, there's a phrase like there's nothing new under the sun is how we say it in like, right? I think that's, but in Hebrew, it's like ein chadash tachas hashemesh. In other words, even if let's put it this way, the Rebbe had many, many talks and and said things that seemed like new, right? Like a new understanding of Torah, a new version, but it's not like the Rebbe innovated it like where it never existed. Like exactly what this phrase is. Anything that anyone would say later, again, from a valid perspective and source and whatever, was really given already by God to Moses. The fact that it could be said by a scholar later is because that was a side or, I don't know, I feel like I'm not being so articulate about this. But for example, even like, let's say when Hasidism started, okay? Somebody actually came, an opponent, I think, came to the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, and he sat down, he put his feet up on the Friedrich Rebbe's desk, and he said, why did Hasidism have to come about? The world was fine, we were all fine. You added this whole, you changed Torah, there was observant Judaism, and we were all observing and practicing. Like, what did Hasidus, what was it needed for? And the Rebbe's father-in-law pointed to there was a marble pillar in the room, and he said, do you see that marble pillar? And the young man said, yeah, I see it. And then the Friedrich Rebbe lit a match, and he held it up to the marble pillar. And then you see all the intricacies of the marble, right? And he said, now do you see it better? Now you can see, you thought you saw it before, and now you can see all the gorgeous, lines and curves within the marble. He said, that's what Hasidus did. It's not a new Torah. It's not something different. It's the same Torah. Now we can see it with new eyes. It's illuminated. And we see that in so many parts where the Rebbe turns some stories on its head, where the person that we think is Korach and his rebellion, and he's so terrible. And the Rebbe has this whole talk on what, almost showing how, yes, he made a mistake, but what he was trying to do and how his intentions were good, and whatever, these things that it's not the Rebbe innovated the idea, but the Rebbe brought that piece of Torah to us now, because now is the time where we needed that more of that mystical dimension in Torah, that deeper part of Torah. I feel like I'm totally getting on a tangent here. But yes, so text number 1, right? This idea that anything that came later was already said to Moses at Sinai. It tells us that in the Jerusalem Talmud. And this, again, this is from the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. And then maybe we'll just do this last text and we'll stop here, because we're not going to get through this handout today, but I will definitely, do this one and the next one for next class, because we're going to continue on this topic for a little bit. So text 2 in the Tanya, it says, the Torah is the wisdom and will of God. For it arose in his will that when, for example, Reuven will argue such and such, and Shimon will argue such and such, the verdict as between them should be such and such. Even if this particular case never was and will never be, nevertheless, since it has arisen in the wisdom and will of the Holy One, blessed be he, that if this one argues such and the other argues such, the ruling should be such, then the person who understands and apprehends with his mind this ruling as a law that is presented in the Mishnah or the Talmud or the works of the halachic authorities, that person apprehends and grasps and encompasses within his mind the wisdom and will of God, which no thought can grasp except when they are clothed within the laws that have been presented to us. So what this is referring to is, if you learn Talmud and you're learning a case that never happened and never will happen, because there are such cases in there. And in my mind, my human mind wants to say, why would I ever learn such a thing that is so irrelevant to my life? But the truth is, it is God's wisdom and will. It is Torah. Torah is like God downloading his brain. And again, I'm using human terminology over here, and saying, here, you want to know everything I think and everything I feel and everything that's going on inside of me, and right? Here it is, downloaded brain right here for you. So when we're learning a piece of Torah, we are learning a piece of Torah. It is God's wisdom and will, regardless if it feels super spiritual, regardless if my human intellect can understand it, regardless if it moves me to go take action. Yes, Torah is for the sake of doing mitzvah, but Torah study in and of itself is also a mitzvah. And so even if you're learning something that it feels very esoteric or very not practical, we learn about all the sacrifices in the Holy Temple, tons and tons, Torah portions, and right, and meanwhile, there's no Holy Temple and we're not offering sacrifices, right? But it is Torah. So that's, again, just we're part 1 of this class or whatever about the divinity of Torah, but we will go into the human element in it plus a lot more. I think I packed a lot into today, and so I'm going to leave today with what today was. Does anyone have any other questions or comments or anything they want to bring up before we?
A wholehearted thank you, Adina. This is fascinating.
You're welcome.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I do too. Thank you, Adina.
Does this feel very new to everyone, or very basic, or I'm just curious?
It sounds like things that I have known forever, but it puts a spotlight on things so that I can understand a little bit better things that I thought I already understood.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful, Adina.
All right. My pleasure.
Thank
just
you very
highlights
much.
everything. Thank you so much.
Okay. I will
Thank
see you
you.
all next
Goodbye.
week. God willing.
Like I
All
said,
right.
be well.
Bye-bye.
Take care.